Hey there, it's Christine, your friend who's walking beside you on the path from grief to growth. Today, I welcome Barbara With, a psychic who is focused on conflict revolution. What do I mean? It's so exciting. It's a new way of looking at yourself, witnessing your grief. We travel through her experiences with murder of her dear family members, work our way into her work as a psychic when it first came about, to how she has been working with this revolution, a witnessing of oneself, and how that has healed and brought healing to not only her own grief, but those to who she serves. Welcome, Barbara, today as we explore the world of grief from a different perspective and the abilities that we may have within ourselves. Take care. Welcome to Grief Uprooted, a podcast dedicated to sharing your grief stories. Together, we embark on the mystery of one's grief journey as they learn to live, heal, and be courageous in a world rooted in trauma. Join myself, Christine, in an open discussion to help you uproot the grief in all our lives. I am an award winning author, professional speaker, and humanitarian in the field of grief and trauma. I want you to be part of the discussion. Welcome back to Grief Uprooted. I'm your host, Christine de Nederlanden. Today, I have Barbara with me. And before we start today, there's something I read about her that I absolutely love and kind of want to focus on today. When we bring peace to our own world, we radiate outward and affect the rest of the world as well. Welcome, Barbara. How are you?
Good, Christine. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I am so much looking forward to our conversation. So, you have two things that I kind of want to touch on that I haven't with Grief Uprooted. So, I would love to kind of take you back in time to your grief experiences. They're quite different than what I've showcased so far. So, if you don't mind just sharing a little bit about the types of grief you've experienced.
The ones I think that were the most profound were had the strange situation of having two separate murders in my family. I
Mhm.
was recently on a it was called, about a podcast about murders, and she said in all the 5 years she'd never found anybody who had, families who were many were murdered at one
Yeah.
in any case. So in the summer of 2006, my cousin Amy was murdered
Mhm.
by the father of her second child
Wow.
while she was meeting him to talk about child support. And he just got in the car and threw down a fake suicide note, had his 5-year-old daughter in the truck,
Mhm.
killed her, and went shopping at Pottery Barn.
Wow.
So, of course, they got him instantly and knew exactly. And then in 2012, my nephew Howie Adler was stabbed 31 times in his driveway in Denver.
Wow.
And that was also he was a young man who was the ex of Howie's uh, baby mama, and they were having difficulties in court. And so I think those were probably the most profound kinds of grief.
Yeah, and I gotta step back. The 5-year-old was okay? Did he go to Pottery Barn with the 5-year-old? You said they were, yeah. Okay. Just clarifying that for everybody. Um, and it seems like they all come from domestic. Like it seems like situation
Yes.
domestic. Um, wow, that's gotta be, you're giving me goosebumps. Because a lot of times that's exactly right. A lot of people who experience grief, it's it's a one-off. But to have it happen twice, you know, I just kind of like to go where I'm led. So, one of my questions that I want to ask you is, do you find purpose in that? Like, why do you think, is there anything behind that? Because a lot of times when people are dealing with grief, and I ask this because it happens in suicide a lot. where people are looking at why is this happening to me? And that seems to be a constant, right? And you try to help them through that. But do you wonder why murder?
Well, I certainly did at the time of both of them. Uh, the first one, I think, was oddly, I would say, more impacting because I'd never been through it.
Mhm.
Even though the second one, I was much closer to Howie and my sister than I was to my cousin. But just the thought of somebody getting in the car and with a gun, and then he had another child that wasn't even their child. He had another child that was waiting in the truck.
Mhm.
Was so unfathomable to me. And I also, being that I am a psychic,
Mhm.
I had this reoccurring dream every night. And I would wake up screaming, "What about the kids?" And it would be like I described it as if I imagine what it would like when the plane flew into the World Trade Center and had a hole before it collapsed. There was this wind, I think, that blew through. And so I had this reoccurring, and it was so incredibly upsetting to me. It upended my entire, I questioned everything in my life and consequently made some huge changes. But why? Why murder? I think we all need to find that meaning. I have a pretty esoteric understanding for me of why, that it's a bigger picture that I'll never be able to answer.
It's so true, so true. And so the second one um was your sister's son, so that's your nephew.
Yeah.
And yeah, that is hard to process. And I think that's why I really loved the phrase that you had, bringing peace to ourselves, because I think that's a lot of us, and I know a lot of you out there that are listening, we often have people cast stones towards us, which is you should be healing, you should be, why is this happening? And this isn't going to happen to me because I'm good and I do everything I'm supposed to do. We all have this. And it's hard because you're like, yeah, why me? And then everybody in society is kind of pushing you to move forward, and there's that level that you're still carrying. So I loved reading about you and all that you've been doing, because it's like it's all about healing the self, and however that self comes about, and then we can affect others. And for me, a big focus is affecting the next generation and having them start talking about this stuff. Um, so I really, you let it out of the bag. She's a psychic. And I really want to know how that has impacted or informed in the way you grieve. And I think I want to start there, and then I'm going to ask you a few questions because I have compiled some questions from my listeners that they struggle
Great.
with. So I think this will be fun. So how does
Okay.
that impact your grief process?
The first person I ever knew who, personally, a friend who died, it was in 1987, and he was a sort of a mentor, uh, like an English professor mentor that I got close to, not in any romantic way,
Yeah.
but when he died, I was so grief-stricken. I just didn't know how I was gonna get over this death. And I was young. I mean, I was in my 30s, what have you, 20s. And when I started to do this work as a psychic, and the information started to come through me, first from angels and then from Albert Einstein and others, it gave me an understanding of life after death,
Mhm.
especially in the beginning when we were talking to angels. And there was such a comfort
Mhm.
to know that, oh, okay, this, and it felt
Yeah.
very angelic. It felt much bigger than just me hoping good things. But then when Einstein came in, which is a whole long story, but and showed us the nature of afterlife,
Mm.
and why scientifically, from his perch in afterlife, when we create peace within, it naturally manifests around us in ways that we couldn't go at if we went at it in the lens, the arena of the conflict. When we go at it here, exactly why? And as I grew in that, as I learned that I could speak to people who had passed on, um, they were just my associate's mother and somebody else's father and all these not famous people.
Mm.
It gave me this such a comfort.
Yeah.
And there's always a question in your head, like, because I bet you how many, ever many of your listeners imagine they're talking to their loved one. And how many, if you could get it out of your head that that's just a crazy idea and then you're just making the whole thing up and realize that's really how the structure is. And if you look at religions all through the years, including Christianity, Jesus rose from the dead, came back and talked to everybody and said, you're going to do this too. So it really has colored the way that now at this age, when someone passes, depending upon, is it an old person who was going anyway? Was it a young person taken tragically? Was there suffering involved? I mean, there's all different kinds of relationships to it. But ultimately, as Einstein says, we're all going to the party.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And I love that because you went right where I was going to go. People think you're crazy. And I have been in this industry for 24 years, and people always say, why in the world did you choose this? Why are you doing this? And my first experience of my brother dying, and he tragically fell over Niagara Falls Gorge to his death. And 6 months later, they thought I had bone cancer in my right leg. And I remember being wheeled into that operating room asking not to be woken up. And when I woke up and he said, you must have an angel watching over you, I will never forget the first time that I went, oh my God, who's that? And I was scared shitless. And I went, oh, I'm crazy. I've went crazy. And I started to try to conform to society and hide what my grandmother coined the seeing. And I always tried to hide this ability that I had. And I remember going to a Catholic priest and him handing me booklets on how certain prayers to cast this out and then he had prayers to bring it in. And he was like, this is something you should welcome. And so I always, you know, just really went with that. When I saw people, I, was able to go, I can connect to you. Um, and I finally, in my last book, wrote a chapter called The Gift of the Seeing, um, and had many experiences right down to aiding in 9/11 with a small group of children and having my own impact of that. Again, that's a long story, so I don't want to really take up time on that. But it was fascinating to me to be down on my knees, crippled in an old chapel in the mountains and think I'm hearing the most beautiful music and seeing the most amazing people and come out of that chapel in the morning to have somebody say, you play the organ beautifully. I don't know how to play anything. And I went, oh my goodness. And I went back in that group that I was running for young children for 9/11. And I had asked them the day before to bring pictures of their loved ones, sorry, to this group. And when I looked at those pictures and realized that I had an experience where their loved ones came to me the night before to say, you can do this. Thank you for taking care of our children. My heart broke. And since then, have started working in many different cultures. And last year in September, at a Camp SOAR, an elder came up to me and said, no longer should you use the word hokey, crazy. Let it go. And I thought, you're right. It's time. It really is time to let this go. And, you know, I share that story because all of you out there, are sending me questions of how do I connect my loved one? How come I can't see them? How come I want this experience? I want this. And, you know, I feel like it's something that comes within when you start healing and you start letting things go. So, letting go of that idea that this is crazy, the idea, because Einstein left a legacy. He left a legacy. So did so many other people. Carl Jung, like, Freud, they all left a legacy, and these people were so forward thinking, so before their time. And why wouldn't we? So many cultures, so many religions are talking about our ancestors coming back and talking to us, generational grief. Like, you can't deny it. And that's the part that I'm so like, where crazy and hokey came from, I have no idea, because it just doesn't fit when you really look at it from a logical perspective. And that
Well,
frustrates.
and that too. And I was recently on a podcast a couple of weeks ago where she said, it's the freak genius.
Mm,
You start out, you're a freak, and you're a freak, and you're a freak, and you're a freak, and then you get to a point where now you're the genius. And it sounds like that's where you've gotten to, and so you don't have to uh, abide by just pattern thinking, voices of culture, and that reflect in our head,
mhm,
part of the stuff we work on in conflict revolution. And now, when you open to it, and I would say to your listeners, if they want to be more open to it, what you said about healing,
mm,
people come to me, they lose someone, they come right to me and they go, please, I have to. And I say, no,
mm,
because that's your way to escape facing the inevitable that this person is gone. And you need to go in there. And when you get in there, it's going to be hard, but there's going to come a time where you're going to be more in a better place to be able to hear.
mm,
And they because what happens is, people don't understand this, is that here you are, you've just lost this person that's never coming back. And there's this inevitability that, and then of course we face our own death, right? Well, okay, that's me too. And when the person from afterlife approaches you, it hurts. They're
mhm,
gone.
mhm,
So they step back, and then you feel like they're gone. So there's this time where they can't win, they can't lose, so they just have to wait it out. And then for those people who say, why can't I do this? Get out of your idea that this is crazy and hokey.
yeah.
It is the place of imagination. So it does feel, every time I channel, every time I talk to anybody, it kind of feels like my imagination, but it's bigger than that. It's a
Mhm,
body feeling,
yeah.
something in your body that you just know. And as you work for your inner peace and start to pay attention to what you're thinking and how you're limiting yourself, kind of the shift starts to happen. And pretty soon
Yeah.
you got dead people talking to you all the time.
Yeah. So true. So sure. So um I'm going to admit there's words that I kind of look at and go, what does she kind of mean? So when you deliver a unified field theory and maps of human consciousness from Albert Einstein, and you put, does this inform, I added, or suggest the ideal of life after death or existence of after death, like talking to dead people. Um, can you explain that a little bit for me?
When I decided in 2005 that I was going to talk to Einstein just for his own little book, I didn't know, I had no idea what I wanted him to say. I just wanted to know what he was going to say. It was a 100-year anniversary of E equals MC squared.
Mhm.
And so I channeled 6 groups. I close my eyes and I talk and we record it and transcribe it. And I went to edit. And I felt like he was sitting right here telling me things like, okay, Google black holes.
Mhm.
And he'd say, take these 3 terms that are actually from the structure of black hole and put them over here on this map. So we're building this map of his unified field theory, how matter is manifest,
Yeah.
how human energy, human intention, interacts with energy to create matter. So he's, solving the mysteries of the universe. And he came through with what he said was a scientific, quantifiable definition of compassion with a capital C, not just compassion as we know, but a much bigger, broader, almost godlike definition of compassion as the fifth fundamental force of the universe
Mhm.
that's impelling the other four fundamental forces to create the physical world and the universe one step at a time. But we can't do that unless we have our human interaction with that energy. Otherwise, it's just the mathematics. It isn't until we step up and have that and create this physical universe through our bodies and such. So that was and is the his theoretical proof of how and why afterlife exists.
Mhm.
And when you see, he calls it the new operating system, and it's a big operating system involving all these different pieces, and the middle, the source, the void, the center of everything is in the center of the planet,
Mhm.
and it fits over the Earth's electromagnetic field and kind of its structure. But it's the human intention that helps us come to life in this body.
Yeah.
And without the body, when the body dies, all of the information is still spinning on this string, sort of like a hologram of who we'd been. Every decision that we ever make, every experience we ever have is compiled on the spinning string while we're alive. And then when our body dies, the string continues. And that's how he describes how he can talk through me. He just sort of positions his spinning string on my spinning string and uses my body and my voice and my spirit to do this great good in the world. And to me, having that experience, I can't pretend anymore that there isn't an afterlife.
Yeah.
It's just what I've experienced.
And I think, tying that into Freud, I did a podcast 2 weeks ago about melancholy. And because a lot of times depression, the stages of grief were created for the dying by Kubler-Ross. She worked with people who were dying, and she had some things that they continuously experienced. But we are living, and one of those is depression. But Freud's theory on this was you're in melancholy. And I love that word so much better because it's deep sorrow. And it happens for about a year. And in that deep sorrow, you need to connect to one's energy and others. And within that, leave the process alone. You will heal. And I thought, wow. And when I think of Einstein and you think of it's all about energy and all those things that he does, it only makes sense that that person would be, hey, there's this energy within us, and we all know that, we all experience that, feel that, we know who we are. Well, most of us do. And it's great when you can tap into this energy within yourself. But um it exists, and I feel like in religion we call it a soul or a spirit so that's what I'm talking about by everybody knowing it. But I do think that energy is there. And there's been so many different things where you walk into a room and the energy is bad, or somebody's on like 92.1 on the radio and you're like, woo, 105, right? So I think everybody can relate to the energy analogy. But what I think is so great is tying it back to our history. And that really redefines it. I just was going to back up because once you said you used to work with two women. It was correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, when I started to automatic write and started channeling in 1987, and I had a mother of a friend of mine who was a psychic all through high school and for years, so I knew what it was. But in 1993, I wanted to do group channeling. I thought I was a fan of Edgar Cayce and Jane Roberts, and I thought, well, what would this voice? Because my mentor always just said I was a antenna. Like I
Mhm.
was just like a pipeline able to pick up information and back. There wasn't angels or anyone. So when I started to channel and I asked, "Who are you?" and the answer was, "We're sound."
Oh,
And I thought, I'm okay with that. I'm a musician. I've been writing music since I was 16. I've been on the road. I'm good with that. So I didn't question.
Mhm.
So none of my clients were interested in doing a group. I was a little surprised, but then Teresa showed up and she sent six of her girlfriends, and then she sent her best friend Kim. And before you know it, I was like, oh my gosh, here's the group. And they're like, would you come and channel for us as a group? And so that was when I really officially started the work of conflict revolution, because that was what happened. Was we'd organize these groups, we'd record it and transcribe it, and they said they were angels, and they had this revolutionary process
Wow.
that they needed to test on humans to resolve conflict first within, and the byproduct would be world peace. They will always stress that it's the byproduct, because it
Mhm.
really is self-love what they were what they were teaching us, but they were calling it world peace one person at a time, starting with you.
Mhm.
And we actually had real conflicts and actually got the transcripts and had the miraculous outcomes that the angels
Mhm.
were hoping to see. And some, I don't know, a few months ago, Einstein said, in the beginning, when we were doing that with you and Kim and Teresa, the psychic sorority, we called ourselves, we were worried because we thought, how can we inspire you when you're having these conflicts and in the pain to have the wherewithal to be
Mhm.
inspired to test this theory? But we quickly found out that it wasn't us, and it wasn't even you guys inspiring yourselves. It was that it was the truth. And the truth is what inspires us from within,
Mhm.
each one person at a time, whatever truth,
Mhm.
you know, is anybody's truth, however it, but we know the truth when we feel it.
And I think that's like, I feel like I've been on a journey, but from the other end, and I'm connecting to the other end of this journey. And meaning, first off, I love that you had a group of people. I firmly believe a group of people is how one heals. I don't feel we heal alone. Um, and a lot of times with pain, when people are in great sorrow and pain, they look at me and say, why? And I look, because you're shifting in life, and you need to go with this shift. And out of great pain, that's why it's grief to growth. You will grow exponentially beyond what you could ever dream of if you accept, if you sit and realize this is nothing to do with you. Nothing. You are in this world, you are this energy, and you know, it's horrific. It's awful. And it should not happen to anyone. Um, but death is part of it in awful, awful ways. And it's the hardest thing to grasp and move forward from. And I think with others, we can unify together, and that healing can come because there's that underlining energy. And I believe there are those angels, there are those people before us who are speaking, but we are in such a world of let's deny the truth. Let's go shopping. Let's buy the big house. Let's buy the fancy car. Let's do this. Let's deny, deny, deny. And then when grief hits, all that means nothing. It's the only thing in life that's non discriminating. Doesn't care what color you are, doesn't care what religion you are, doesn't care how wealthy you are, doesn't give a crap about you. And it equalizes us. And at that point is when you go, what's the truth? And I've seen some embrace the truth, and I've seen some, me included, and I use a jar with a little girl in it that says, this isn't for me. I'm not ready. And I do believe that sometimes emotional denial is a process for our brain. And we need to emotionally deny that. And it's totally okay. And don't rattle the person's jar. And I think that's where they are. Um, but I just find this work so fascinating, and can obviously relate to it. I'm dyslexic. And for years, you talk about uh, what they classified you as. I was classified as an opener. when I worked with the Friendship Ambassadors and Lions International for 9/11 grief camps. And they were like, you have this unique ability to get people to talk, but having that challenge of being dyslexic, they often told me I had a comprehension problem. And when I went to go off to university, they asked me what I would like in exchange for aiding. I said, love to go to university, but no one will let me in because I don't seem to be that smart. And then once I got in and we did all this testing, they said you're superior in oral communication. And I thought, fascinating. And then I went on to work in that, and they said, and you're very dyslexic. Oh, explains a lot, doesn't it? And so, that's when you go, oh, I see the world a little bit different. And started to rely, and I've always relied on reading people because, the written word just never came. And as an author, oh my goodness, I have a wonderful editor. Um, so, but this whole,
Well,
go ahead. What were you gonna say?
oh, I was just going to say one of the things that we always advise when people are like, why? Because it's a mystery. Now let's ask how.
Mm,
How? How are you going to get through this?
mm,
How are you going to feel your feelings? How are you going to be in the mystery? How are you going to make it one more step? I used to describe coming out of my trauma like I was pulling myself out of a hole by my fingernails. And
mm,
I'd get right up to the top and then I just slide back down again until that day. It was probably 4 months of this, or 4 years actually. I finally, I think I'm out of the hole. So, how are you going to inspire yourself?
mhm,
How are you going to make the most um, of this really unique gift? I think death is such a gift. Even the first time when it was the hardest, it was like I was like, wait a minute, I never expected this in grief. That I would get to touch so deep in my emotional self that I never would access if I was doing all those things you were describing.
yeah,
Where money and houses and even if you're living an austere life,
yeah.
nobody chooses to go into those deep emotional places where you can't deny it anymore. So how are we going to make the best of it?
And death for me, I describe the same as a gift. And I know there are many of you that are listening that are grieving, and you're like, this is not a gift. You're both wrong. And I agree with you. It's horrific. And but when you're decades out, as I am, um, I I had these intimate relationships with people that were not sexual. And every time I use the word intimate, people go, oh, a sexual relationship. No, these emotional conversations and intimate, like I will never forget that person who shared their grief story with me. To me, that was an honor to hear that story and to have that connection and feel that energy go back and forth. And it's like, I know the next word that's going to come out of your mouth. And that person to look at me and say, it's okay, your physical body is responding to my story. Because I say to people, this physical body is going to react, but I can still stay intact. I can still talk through the tears, but I can't control the body from crying or reacting to the story you're telling me because I'm feeling it. And that's okay. So I that intimate experience with every one of the people I talk to or work with is what I think is beautiful out of grief, that they're going to a depths of within themselves they did not know existed. And that is such a strength within them. And I'm like, tap into that now for the rest of your life. Um, it'll be amazing. So many of the children I worked with from 9/11, um, when I went to Ground Zero and started working with those kids, they've all stayed in contact, and they have done miraculous things in their lives to change the world. And it all derives from that one event. And that one event was extreme anger. And, and extreme racism came out of that towards, the culture that attacked the trade towers. And it was like, wow, I can see how this happens. And how in the world do I, and being able to say, those people are crying too. They did not want this. This is a set of individuals. This is not a culture. And that's when, I saw the light bulb go on and I'm like, they are crying with you. No way, shape, or form do they want this. And, that's when I started to see this healing, and I started to see the connections and people reaching out to each other going, okay, this is a world tragedy. This is not just your tragedy between two countries. This is the world. Um, so impactful. So I guess one of my questions that I'm kind of interested in about is, how does that afterlife affect your grief? And do you get triggers from it, like you say, walking around and seeing all this? How do you control it from coming in and out?
I think the experiences that I have had with afterlife have impacted how I process the grief.
Hmm.
So for example, my mother passed away in 2018, and she lived to be 96 and died in her living room, thankfully, because of me and the work that I did to get some help installed for her. So we knew it was coming, but it took about 3 weeks from the time that she really started to go downhill to the time she passed. So
Mhm.
she didn't have long to go. But when she died, it was one of the, I think maybe more than the murders, but
Mhm.
about that impact, that
Mhm.
I went right back to being 9 years old and unprotected now without her there. And so I had a lot of emotional stuff to work through.
Mhm.
And certainly I think losing your mother is one of the worst things anybody can go through. But we come out the other side, and it happens
Mhm.
all the time. But I was able to see her and my father, who had passed away in 2014. They were not together and not talking, but see them come together. And it was sort of like, I described it as watching them kind of sitting there, like just talking through stuff and having like my father go, I see what you're trying to tell me, Barb,
Yeah.
and having her. And so then I could see them sort of continue to evolve on a soul level. And whether it was just my imagination, what came out of it to me was watching these people heal their souls, and then finally being there in a really strong divine feminine and a strong divine, not all the trauma and turmoil and really dysfunction that I grew up with, but there they were. So if that's just my imagination, more power to me, I
Mhm.
think,
Uh,
because it's healed me and provided me with a closure from a lifetime of trauma.
mm. And I think I love that you said that, because that's where I was going to go, is those experiences, people will say, it can't be real. It can't be. I shouldn't, it's my imagination. And I often think the same, because I have those same experiences. When I want to put something from my past that was traumatic, either work or personally, and being able to sit with those people from the afterlife that I see and go, I need your help. And sometimes I walk away and go, I don't know, but you know what? I feel fantastic, right? And I'm dying to tell somebody. So, just having somebody to run to and talk to and say, hey, this is what I've experienced. And I think we need, when we're grieving, to be open to that. I encourage so many people, talk to your loved ones. Talk.
Yeah,
One day they may answer back. And that
absolutely.
might be, hey, go Google this. It might be, hey, write this phone number down. Follow it. What do you have to lose? Nothing, right?
Yes.
So I feel like you may grasp some healing from that. We interrupt this podcast for a dirty moment.
My dirty moment is any time that I get triggered. I have to honestly say I don't get a lot of grief triggers, although I did just the other day going through some old stuff from my past. And I do always do the same thing. First of all, I start to feel and breathe because a trigger is an emotional sort of wake up call that there's this emotion coming. And then I really make sure that I get kind of into a witness of myself so that I can just make sure that I'm with myself, breathing, feeling, riding that wave, and knowing that this too will pass, and it always does.
So I love that. I love that. Another thing you mentioned when we were talking was, um, and I often thought it was conflict resolution, but you're saying conflict revolution. What do
Yes.
we mean by that?
Well, conflict resolution is kind of a familiar process where two people are under conflict and you have to talk in a certain way and you each have to understand each other and there's some kind of negotiation that goes on. Conflict revolution is this process that you administer to yourself.
Mm,
It's based on this map of human consciousness that Einstein delivered to me in 2005. And the work that I did with the psychic sorority, working on the transcripts from the angels who said they'd come here to give us this process for world peace, one person at a time. And they needed people to test
mhm,
their theory on conflict. So conflict revolution has come out of all that actual research and development. Then I started training it as a workshop and in nonprofits and such. So for 30 years, we've been training it, and it it is a process that you have to be willing to implement on yourself. It's simple. It's not easy to do always, but
mhm,
it's simple to understand. There's like four components
mhm,
of the map of human consciousness. We have intellect, which we think is in our heads, and intuition, which is in our hearts, and emotion in our solar plexus.
mhm,
And then we have a witness. And we set about every day to wake up, of course, all our gratitude, even in the worst of things, and then set about to set our intention. I'm going to watch myself today. I'm going to watch what I'm thinking. I'm going to watch what I'm feeling. And I'm going to try to see what intuition might be impelling me to do at any given moment.
mhm,
And in learning deeper the process of conflict and what each one means, because each human dimension, we call them three human dimensions, has its own purpose and function, sort of like your organs. Your heart does this, your kidneys do this, your intestines, you treat them all differently, but they all work together to create this system of human life. And in those three, we have the opportunity to have a different relationship to them. So when you're really, really grieving, and there's a lot of sometimes there's nothing in your head, and that's what drives you so crazy because there's this vacuumous void. But the times where I should be over it by now, I should be blah 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 blah. We deal with that in one way.
mhm,
Like how do we control the thought processes? What do we replace them with that are going to be more self-loving? And
mhm,
then emotion, we deal with in a completely different way. And it's not to allow our emotions to get caught in our thoughts. Because, when you're very sad and then the thought comes up, I'm never going to see him again, it creates that reality. So we start to feel and breathe, teach people how to breathe through their feelings in present moment
mhm,
because you can regulate your feelings, but you can't control them.
mhm,
You don't wake up and go, from 10 to 12, I'm going to do a little anger here, and then I'll get some joy in the afternoon. They come in waves. And we teach people how to ride the waves, to move them, to get all that trapped emotion from trauma and grief moving through our system without letting them really attach to thoughts that are degenerative or
Your mind, your intuition, and my emotions are down here.
Yeah, intuition in your heart.
Intuition in my heart. So my mind, my intuition in my heart, and then my emotions are kind of around my tummy area.
Hmm.
Um, and the one thing with I think that really impacts grief is we're all looking for resolution. And what I love what you're doing is so many times we don't get resolution in grief. We don't get an answer. You can't resolve it and move on. So I love this concept of revolution because you're saying that I have the ability to control my mind, and to follow this intuition and to realize my emotions are here. I love how you've separated them for me because now I'm able to go, okay, wait a second. I did this thing that a colleague of mine asked me to do because I was quite struggling. And it was in recent events. It was like 2 weeks ago. And she said, record yourself, talk to yourself. And I went, why would I do this? And she goes, I don't think you hear yourself. And so I did. And I heard this little voice. And I was like, and I rewind it. And I'm like, why am I saying that to myself? And I was so shocked. And I was like, oh, I've got to do this every day. And I realized that the stuff coming out of here was bullshit. My language. I was like, what are you saying to yourself? And I thought, how come I can't hear that? So I love how you're saying, here's your mind, here's your intuition, and here's your emotions. Because I feel like my emotions are here. And
Right, right. Everybody does.
yeah, and just
Emotion.
you just saying that right now has helped me because I'm like, you're right. My emotions are actually in my stomach. That's why I'm an emotional eater. And so I never even put two and two together. So I think that just helps myself and listeners to go, wait a second, that makes sense. Emotions down here. So what's the witness? That's what I'm curious about.
That see, and what your friend told you when you said to record yourself, this
Mhm.
is conflict revolution. So the witness is the part of you that when you get up in the morning, I always have my prayers of gratitude, and then I say, I fully intend, I am going to witness what's going on in my head, what's going on in my
Oh,
heart, what's going on in my solar plexus throughout the day. So that when you get triggered, because you were talking about triggers, you get triggered, there's an emotion that comes up. And then when you immediately, that's where you step into the witness and go, let's see what's going to come up. And then you can see what those thoughts are that you can't see when you're in your head because there's so much going on in that intellect. There's imagination, there's yesterday, there's tomorrow, there's every potential that you could think of. So you have to zero in on these definitions. Well, I'm a really good person. I would never lie to anybody. And that's who you feel that you are. But when you step out into your witness and you watch yourself when somebody says, hey, you want to go to the movies, and you really don't want to be around that person, and then you go, oh, sure.
mhm.
And in your head, you're saying, well, they did this for me. And meanwhile, intuition is saying no,
Yeah, that's so
but
true.
intellect is making these decisions, which is where that lies. And that center is where decisions are actually implemented in your intellect. You don't make decisions with your emotion.
Yeah.
It's flowing up here, and intuition is always going to tell you the next most advantageous step for the good of the whole system.
Wow.
And the intellect's been given the power of free will to operate out of that. Then that, Einstein says, is the root of every single conflict. So revolution is about getting your focus off of the outside. He's not here or whatever, in loss,
Mhm.
back and around, but you're here. So what are you feeling? And breathing and feeling that and loving it.
Oh, I
So,
love this. And
yeah.
basically, and this is where I think paths cross to have you come on Grief Uprooted at this very time while I'm recording myself every day going, what are you telling yourself? And then me going, who's the witness? And you're like, you, I said, right? It's like light bulb, light bulb, light bulb. And I know my listeners are doing the same thing because you don't realize that. Like, and I'm thinking somebody from the outside is going to be telling me what to do, but essentially I carry all these answers. And I'm a high emotional eater. I love a good chocolate cake.
Mm.
after anything I do that invokes happy or sad, I always think it's a time to eat sugar. So I love how you've separated that for me. That feels very good, and I think people can practice that too, and dive further in by reaching out to you and everything. I have one last question. It's kind of maybe off topic, but somebody had wrote in asking me about this, and I thought you would be the perfect person to go for. If you're an empath, so there's the psychic, and then there's a lot of highly sensitive, empathic people. And this seems to arise after grief. After somebody dies, a lot of people come to me and say, I tune in to all the grief. And I do this. I tune into the room, and I have a very hard time disconnecting from the emotion in the room. And when conflict arises, you're feeling their pain. So it's hard to kind of stand in your own ground and say, this is what I want to do, because that fight is happening between the intuition and the brain, because you're emotionally, and I can see it now. It's like emotionally, I have a cord coming out of my belly button that's attaching because I can feel those emotions. So boom, I'm connected. But the intuition is like, get out, don't be connected. And the mind's like, but they were so nice to me and they did all this stuff. And um, how do you protect yourself in that sense? Do you have anything? Have you ever?
Yeah, I have this theory after all this work that emotion is much different than we think it is.
Mm,
Since on the quantum level, it's kind of the primordial soup, it's all the building blocks of what the physical world is in
mhm,
the our Einsteinian world, that it makes sense that you would feel everything
mm,
from everyone because at that level, and this is all begins in the center of the planet, according to Einstein. So emotion is really situated very close to the center of the earth on this gravitational wave that is us. So
mhm,
of course you feel the entire world. And then if you're in believe in reincarnation, there's other lives, there's just people that you're close to. Emotion is so much more than we intellectually analyze it as.
yeah.
So that helps me. And then to know that it's my job to have really good boundaries.
Mm,
And there's no excuse not to have really good boundaries.
mm,
So I don't buy any of it. People go, oh, I'm just an empath and I just soak in. It's like, yeah, that's good. That's how we operate in the world as humans. We're connected energetically. But now you need to set some boundaries for your own self-love.
mhm,
And you don't have to be thrown hither and yon, especially as we feel those feelings with our breath work and empty out, we call it emptying out the basement that we
mhm,
don't even know we have, filled with emotion, feeling and breathing and feeling and breathing. And then, well, how do you know that feeling is from that person or another life or somewhere on the rest of the planet? You don't know that.
mhm. Exactly.
So, and for me, who had these lessons really a lot, had to set some boundaries for myself.
Mm,
Um, Now it's very natural. Like I can feel a lot of emotion that I don't sit and go, well, that's the guy down the street or that's the past thing. It's just like, here it comes. Take that breath. Let's get this stuff moving. And then I take it one step further where I channel that emotion, whether it's sadness or
yeah,
anger or bad emotions, quote unquote, into thoughts that I want to see happen.
yeah, yeah,
So whether it's for myself, I have intentions to bring this work worldwide so that we can all reach this time, or that I want world peace to break out, or I really have gotten to where I can channel that into that. And it's so exciting. I'm very excited for anybody who's listening, like you're piqued by it. These aren't new
yeah.
ideas. You know what all these pieces are. They're just put in this way that makes you go, oh, wait a minute, that makes sense.
It does. It does. And what I love about it is A lot of times in my career, anger's, this, I know it's a secondary emotion. Everybody talks about that, but I think it's hurt I'm feeling by the world, by society, and by what happens. And when I got to a stage that I went, my babies are okay. And what I mean by that is my children are old enough to make decisions and be on their own. It's time for mama to say what she needs to say. And that's where Grief Uprooted came from. I said, enough of this, enough of hiding and not sharing what we should be sharing. No matter how you find that healing, we all find healing different. And so there's no one path or one right way, but there is some similarities that we're all experiencing, which I'm compiling into a book and having professionals like yourself say, hey, here's a chapter. Can you share your story on this? And it not be one of someone's personal story. There's a little tidbit of that in each chapter, but be one of how you can take this and move forward and heal. And I think that we need that because we've all just avoided this topic drastically. And we're all just kind of picking. But everybody I've interviewed that has gone through this, that works in this industry, we all have it, but in a different light. It's like that old analogy, we're all holding on to a piece of the elephant, right? And we all are saying the same thing. And just being able to tangibly put that down for the next generation and the people presently to go, hey, this is what's going to come. And these are some suggestions from a variety of different ways to walk this path. And guess what? You got to walk it. And in the end, you will grow exponentially. You will see things you never thought you'd see and never thought you had the capability of. I think that is what's so exciting about the work I do and the work you do. Um, and go ahead. I can tell
I
you.
was just gonna say I think the watchword for that is compassion. And this is our lessons anyway, for starting with ourselves.
Mhm,
How do we have compassion and self-love for ourselves? But when we get to that point where we're starting to really articulate
mhm.
after not speaking up and finding our voice, if we can, to the best of our ability, strive to say things with compassion,
So true.
and then the truth, the truth is going to be the truth.
Hmm.
And the truth will survive skepticism.
Hmm.
I think skepticism is a healthy thing to have because truth will survive it.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. So, in closing, I'm just curious, do you have this occupational hazard where you say you're a psychic and everybody says, oh, can you read me? I find
Yes.
when I'm out and I say I'm working death and dying, people are like, they start telling me everybody who died in their life. And then they ask me all these, and I'm like, oh. And I remember one time being I was out to do a keynote speech and my secretary was with me. And I said, don't tell them what we do. Don't tell them what we do. Because we were out for dinner and having a couple drinks. And she told. And I went, oh. And she's like, but now they're going to tell us everybody who died in their life. And she goes, what? I love it. But I also just wanted to drink. I just wanted to have my one glass of wine. That's all. Right. So, yeah. And so how do you deal with that? Like, how can people, like, do you find that it just comes to you with, like, is it something you can channel and tap into instantly, or is it something that just flows?
I think when really started to develop the gift where I would hear voices say, you need to get this to my daughter who's going to be over there, from people who had passed on. Um, I I was picking up like everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then I came to a point where I realized, I'm not just here to do the bidding of all of you dead people who want me to get messages to your loved ones, or vice versa. And you can come to me for a reading. And I don't, that's not my forte where, we're bringing in the secrets of the universe. Not the forte is not, is your boyfriend going to come back? But, or if you want to, speak to somebody who's passed on, I certainly will make an attempt to
Hmm.
interpret that for you. But for me, it usually happens that I'm visited by the spirit of the one who's passed on, who then leads me to their loved one. So sometimes indulge,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and the truth is you can only know what you know in a moment. Like, oh, my father passed.
Yeah.
Can you get a message? Like, and then I can stop for a second and go, well, was he tall and really gray hair and smoked?
Yeah.
And then we can have a conversation. But I'm like you know, I'd rather do it in a place where it's really just you and I,
Yeah.
and it's meant to be,
Yeah.
and otherwise you can talk to him too.
Yeah. And I think that's just to share another experience. I have not had as many experiences as yourself, but I find it very liberating talking to you and being able to just share this type of stuff. Makes me emotional, which I love. I had where I could smell a cigar and it was disgusting. And everywhere I went, I was like, I can't, like, what is this? And I was telling my friends and I was saying to the kids, do you smell something? And then I started getting numbers. And so finally I just thought, I'm gonna write this down. And the smell would come and the number would come in my head. So I write the number down. And it was getting to the point where I was like, okay, all right, what the heck is that? And I just started talking out loud. So the name Oi Oi came in my brain, and I'm like, what? So I thought, I got nothing to lose. I'll continue this conversation. And as time went on, the name Stephen came through and all this stuff. And I eventually got a phone number. So I dialed it. And this is a true story that and that's what's so great about it is because I can back it up. And so I dial the phone number. This lady answers the phone and I said, I know I sound crazy. I said, I work in the field of grief and I was told to dial this number and the name Oi Oi. And this lady starts crying
Oh
and
no.
she said, that is my husband who passed away a month ago. Yeah.
Oh, oh my
I
gosh.
was like, what? And she goes, I'm in Niagara Falls. Oh, she goes, where are you? St. Catharines. My brother died in Niagara Falls. So, um, as time went on, I said to her, who's Stephen? She goes, oh, he was in the army with Stephen. He was his best friend. So then I get invited to the wake in Niagara Falls. And
Of
I'm
course
like,
you
I
did.
don't even know these people. So I show up, this beautiful lady, and she says to me, to her daughters, she goes, this is the lady who's been talking to your father. And I'm like, oh dear. And so then I was like, whoa. And then I saw photos and I was like, oh my goodness. And it was like I saw Steven, I saw Oi Oi, and then they sat me at a table. And it was the joke because the whole time the light bulb above my head kept flashing. And then they put me at a table, and I brought a family member with me, with people I actually knew. And I was like, and they were like, we go to your truck store all the time and buy truck parts. And I'm like, because I ended up buying my father's corporation. And I was like, oh my goodness. And it was a surreal experience, but one I followed so that I could say to myself, I'm not crazy. And that's exactly what I did. So I often look at people and say, I'm not capable of saying, hey, here's your loved one or whatever. But I do wake up at night and go, whoa, who's that? Or I do have these experiences. And I've had to learn the boundaries. I've had to learn that don't emotionally connect, keep your space for your own self. And that very thing you're talking about, revolution, that witness your own pain. I think that is such a huge message I'm getting out of listening to you. Like, witness yourself. And I think by far the hardest thing to do, but the most rewarding and gratifying experience you can have is by stopping.
Absolutely. That's an amazing story.
Yeah, it scared the shit out of me, but I'm so glad that I walked through it because it's truthful
Yeah.
and it's real, and nobody can take that from me.
Yeah.
So
Truth is truth.
yeah, and I had to follow it through, and I did have those thoughts of, I must have made this up. I must have saw the number somewhere. I must have did this. I must have did that. But
Yeah.
in that room in Niagara Falls and just look up and go, you've got to be kidding me.
Really.
Got to be kidding me. And the whole time it turned into such a camaraderie with this individual with Oi Oi because I'm like, seriously? It's already bad enough. I'm standing out here and your kids are talking to me and everything. You got to make the light bulb go on and on. And you could just feel that energy. And I thought, and that's what's really attractive when you talk about Einstein. I know that a lot of people may think that's crazy, but that's energy. And it's
Yeah.
right. So,
Well, and it's why I called the book Imagining Einstein.
mhm,
Because when I wrote that book, I published it in 2006, and I'd just been probably several years of talking to him and still being like, really? Is this gonna be?
yeah,
Um, and I say it in the book. It feels like I'm imagining him sitting there and I'm listening to him and I'm saying it. And if you think it's just my imagination, that's fine. Feel free to believe I just made the whole thing up, but read it
yeah,
and you tell me what it says to you because I'm perfectly willing to say I just made the whole thing up, even though I know that's not how it happened. But that just makes me brilliant.
mhm,
But that's not how it happened. So you read it and you tell me, and then we'll go from there.
yep. And I think the point you're saying is, I'm not here to prove that I'm right. I'm here to give you a path to walk down that may help you heal.
Yeah.
And that's it. There's no right or wrong. And I think ego is put aside in this area big time because grief just does that. I think you're here to say, I'm trying to offer a path and I hope it brings you healing, right or wrong, however that is. So if people wanted to learn more about you, please share your website.
Okay. Barbara with BARBARAWITH.com. That's my personal site. You could book a reading with me there. It links to everything else, but there's a few other things over there. I do a column on propaganda and indoctrination. I'm also an investigative journalist. But Synergy Alliance LLC, Synergy Alliance LLC, that's the whole thing. That's all the books. It's all of the psychic sorority, everything about conflict revolution, my blogs, I doing a summer meditation series of remagnetization. So we're going deep into a meditation where we align with the Earth's electromagnetic waves and do some deep breathing. Everybody has been kind of having some great results so far, including me. Really powerful stuff. But I'm also at the end of the summer, I should have my Conflict Revolution online coursework done, so you can
Oh,
download it at any time. And yeah, just reach out.
I love people like yourself. Everybody says to me all the time, how do you do all this?
I
And
know,
I run
right?
two corporations and I'm like, because I really, after talking to you, I feel such a comfort in myself and who I am. Because when you're witnessing yourself or that revolution you're saying, um, it shows you that you don't need to be in one box. You don't need to just do one thing. You can do multiple things. And when these things are things that help you grow and kind of give you all this energy, you can do multiple things and it not bother you. My day entails so many things, and people are like, oh, how do you do it all? And it's like, it happens because I have the energy from it. It feeds me, it doesn't drain me. So I love the work you're doing. And
Oh, I'm so glad we connected. So very glad.
yeah, it's great. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Do reach out to Barbara. Her personal website is barbarawith.com. And also her other one on Synergy or Synergy, I can't even say that.
Synergy.
Synergy.
Synergy Alliance.
Synergy Alliance. So do take your time to reach out. This has been so exciting to me. I'd love to hear your comments on this, your perspective on this. If you want Barbara to come back, let me know. Love your questions. And maybe we can do something a little bit different that may answer your questions. Yeah, so as usual, thank you for tuning in. And it is only together that we grieve and only together that we heal. Take care, everybody. Grief Uprooted professional grief and empowerment coaching are not to be used as a substitute for professional advice by legal, medical, financial, business, spiritual, or other qualified professionals. All our products and services are designed for grief empowerment through learning and sharing of one's lived experiences.